And I request everybody to turn off your video for the recording portion because then we'll have some better quality of video. And also please mute yourself if you're not already muted. Today is the last but one class of landscape success, and we have just one more class, and these two classes are extremely important on various levels. I'll talk about the last class at the end of the class, but today's class is for planting. And before I introduce Boone, let me introduce myself to you all. My name is Suma Mudan. I have been a master gardener for about 9 years now, and several of you, if you have been attending these classes, are familiar with me. And I now want to introduce Boone. So Boone actually doesn't need any introduction because Boone is a very well-known Fort Bend County Extension agent in horticulture for Texas A&M AgriLife, and Master Gardeners is an extension of that program. And he has been an avid plantsman for most of his life. He holds an undergraduate degree in horticulture from Stephen Austin State University and a master's degree in agricultural education from Texas A&M University. So he's very highly qualified, both from education point of view and also experience point of view. Long before attaining these degree titles, he was an avid gardener and young plant enthusiast. He is still young, okay? He brings previous experience as horticulture staff at Moody Gardens in Galveston, Producers Cooperative in Bryan, and the Texas A&M Department of Horticultural Sciences in College Station. Having work experience in many horticultural industries from retail to landscape design and irrigation installation, he brings that knowledge paired with enthusiasm into Fort Bend County programming efforts. He is happily married to wife Soni. He is a proud father of daughter Bailey and currently resides in Fulshire, Texas. So now I will turn the mic over to Boone, and before I do that, Boone, how do you want to handle questions? Do you want to handle them while you're talking, or do you want to wait till the end of each topic or end of the class?
Thanks, Suma. I'll let you wrangle the questions through the chat box. If it looks relevant to that part of the presentation, then go ahead and chime in.
Okay.
I'm going to leave the chat box closed on my end so that I don't get thrown off by trying to follow along with what's going on in there.
Okay.
If it's something that you think that I'll get to, then let's hold those off to the end, and I'll leave plenty of time at the end of the presentation to dialogue through additional questions and content.
Okay. So everybody, please put your questions in the chat room, and if one of us knows the answer, we will answer it or we will hold it for Boone. And at the end of the class, you will have an option to unmute yourself and ask live questions. So those are the options for questions and answers. And now we'll get started. Thank you so much.
Yep. And thanks again, Suma. And we do appreciate your leadership in this program. We've been doing this for about 5 years now, and we started off this landscape success adventure as a community partnership with Harvest Green, Johnson Development, and then we did it with them for a couple years, and then after COVID kind of changed our worlds a little bit, we partnered with Fort Bend Libraries to help them continue community education, and then we've been back doing this virtually, hosted ourselves for the last 2 years. So Suma has been part of this the whole time. So thank you very much for your contributions and leadership. We will be talking about planting season, and I'll apologize to folks if I don't cover all the plant material content. This presentation is really wrapped around trees, starting off, planting the right time of year, and how to successfully plant trees. When we get to the end, I would be more than happy to continue some dialogue as far as um, planting of additional perennials, shrubs, vines, annual, seasonal annuals, etc. If that's some content that maybe you need some help with, but probably more than ever, planting trees um, is a priority because after another brutal summer here in Southeast Texas, we are expecting that we will see a considerable tree loss within the next couple of years, as we did after the hard drought that we had back in 2011. Um, you do see a lot of the immediate drought and heat stress impacts on trees, but typically it's not for a couple of years afterwards that you start actually seeing trees declining and dying. That's a process that can take up to 5 years to really show up. So we expect that going into the next couple of years, even with good weather, we'll see these trees, many more trees than we're seeing right now, start to fade away for us. So it's a good time for us, particularly if you've got a larger tree or a tree that's shown considerable stress this summer. You may be thinking about proactively replacing that tree in the future, and this presentation should give you some insight on how to prepare to do that in a better, more successful way. So that's a little bit of just the basic introduction for us. We are happy to see some rainfall and some cooler temperatures move into our region, and it looks like fingers crossed, we'll see rain for another day and a half before this low pressure moisture moves away and we warm back up a little bit. But this is very welcome to see some moisture on the ground. I had to fight mosquitoes off me last night, which was the first time I've had to do that in about 2 months. But hey, if it means we get good rain, I could handle some mosquitoes. All right, so the presentation here, I'm going to try to do my best. What I'll be doing is trying to toggle back and forth between a PowerPoint presentation and some pre-recorded videos that I shot a couple years ago that kind of help visualize some of the steps of tree planting that may help you. If you're a visual learner, it might help you kind of go through that process and adhere to some of this content a little bit better. So as I migrate back and forth between the PowerPoint and the videos, I may kind of stumble along with technology, but we'll do our best to get us to the finish line. We'll try to finish the presentation within about an hour today. It'll leave us a little bit of time at the end for some Q&A to get us to the total 1.5 hours that we had on the schedule. All right, so let's go ahead and get moving forward here. Maybe. Okay, so these PowerPoints here have been adapted from a friend of ours, Mr. Paul Weirs-Bickey is the city forester and horticulturist with the Missouri City Parks and Recreation Department. Great resource if you live over on that side of the county. Really has done a huge amount of work with parks and tree plantings in Missouri, in the city of Missouri City, and continues to do that to try to develop a green canopy for the residents today, but particularly for the future generations of residents in that area. A good presentation from a good guy. So really the first thing on this is what we say is the right tree in the right place. So we have to be methodical from the very get-go of looking at a right tree species and making sure that we're putting any type of tree, large or small, in the right place in the landscape. Got some content online through the Texas A&M Forest Service, which the link here would go to. I'll save us time on that, but basically it's going to show people how to identify what are those hazards that we want to look for in the landscape, how to avoid those, and then not only plan for the small sapling tree that you have now, but knowing what the mature height and spread and the root system of that tree is going to look like 30 or 40 years from now, and that's not going to be a big issue for you to have to deal with later on, and a big cost. Usually is the big cost issue that people aren't thinking about, to have a certified arborist come in there and have to maintain a tree that's in the wrong place, or remove a tree that's just gotten too big for that location. So a couple things here. First is let's look up, and we'll see this first picture here. We've got some crepe myrtles that were planted next to some live oak trees that continued to grow. And as these crepe myrtles grew up, they just didn't really have anywhere to grow up into. And so this maintenance company is having to do a whole lot of work to trim those trees back down. More than likely, the health and vigor and the physical appearance of those crepe myrtles are not what the expectation was with the original layout that they had in that spot. Down at the bottom there, we've got some power lines, and we've got a tree that's right up on a house. Two big hazards there, to keep trees away from the roof of the house, away from power lines. And then, as we can see also here, the picture on the right, we have a tree that's been mutilated quite a bit. Unless you're trying to make a Pac-Man, a giant Pac-Man in the sky, that's something that needs to be thought about, that we're keeping these larger canopy trees away from the power lines, because most of us have had some type of experience, or at least just seeing the outcome of the power line easement management company, which for us, our power lines are managed by CenterPoint Energy in our region. And when they come through to do annual inspection of trees and to do annual tree maintenance, those folks just are not concerned about the aesthetics of your tree. What they're concerned about is supplying power to their constituents. So if a tree is a hazard, they're going to remove the canopy and branching from that power line, but they're not going to keep in mind the overall shape and appearance of your tree. And so a lot of times this is something that you'll see as an outcome to the pruning from those management companies. And then down at the bottom in the middle, we have a live oak that has grown over onto the roof, and you see some very obvious shingle damage, which at some point is going to manifest as a water leak coming down, and so a surprise drip on your forehead while you're trying to watch a football game. Not a good thing. So let's keep that in mind when we're planting those trees there as well.
Turn on the water.
Okay, so the next one is look down. Similarly, let's see what type of hazards would be in this spot. One is root system from a retaining wall that is doing some significant damage and lifting that base of that retaining wall. We have sidewalk damage. Similar to the sidewalk there, we would see driveway issues, foundation issues on homes. We've got some drainage infrastructure there on the right that has been compromised by tree roots growing into it and breaking apart either a water supply main, or what you definitely don't want is your tree roots getting into your sewer mains, where that really stinks, you might say. And then at the bottom here, we need to know seasonally, or what is the capabilities of that environment. As we can see here in Southeast Texas during tropical weather time of year, we may have 10 inches of rain come down in one time frame. So we need to know those locations that may hold water and may have standing water there for extended periods of time that would cause the demise of that tree. And just all around, there's some other things you might have to look about. This is again why I like this presentation from Paul. There's a conflict of interest here with these goats, with the tree, dealing with neighbors that may or may not like you or your trees. Got certain tree species that may shed flowers, leaves, and seeds onto cars, sidewalks, swimming pools, etc. And then the lawn here. That's again another horticulture conflict of interest, where if you want this golf course, bowling green type turf grass, if you put a tree there that starts compromising the amount of available sunlight, water, and nutrients, the grass is going to diminish in that area. So be cognizant of that, of deciding which one do you want more. Do you want shade in this location, or do you want bright, beautiful green grass? Because we don't have any actual turf grasses in our region that are shade loving. People use that terminology with St. Augustine grass as it's a shade grass, and this is not true. St. Augustine is a southern warm season turf grass that tolerates some amount of shade. It's not that it likes shade. It likes full sun. That's where it wants to be, out in wide open sun, 12 to 14 hours a day. It loves it. You go out to the turf grass farms that are down in Wharton County, Matagorda County. There's no trees out there. There's no shade cover. That's in full sun, and the grass is beautiful. Just as lush and green as it's ever going to get in that full sun environment. So the more we start diminishing the sun from that growing area, even a St. Augustine grass is going to start diminishing quite a bit, until where, especially with dense trees like live oaks, you'll get to a point where there's so much canopy that you've completely diminished the turf stand, and have to start looking at some other alternatives beyond the St. Augustine grass. And again, here it's looking to make sure that we have these trees in the right place, because this is pretty common. This picture here on the left of the outcome of some heavy tree work from the power line management company, and they're not at fault for this, really. I mean, that's an easement. It's up to the residents there to be knowledgeable on what you can and can't plant, and the guidelines of that easement is all the way down to the ground from the power lines. So when they come in, if they need to move the tree away from the power lines to secure the safety of those lines, then this is what they'll do, and they're not going to feel bad about it. Best thing to do here is just to plant the right size tree, or move the tree a significant distance away from the power line, instead of dealing with this at some point. I'll save this one. All right, let me see if I can't pull this thing off here. We're gonna go here, and I'm gonna try to click up this video. Let's see what happens. I'm going to talk about spacing. When we're designing the landscape and trying to figure out a place to put a tree, we have to consider the size of the tree. And I know we're tempted as gardeners and homeowners to plant multiple trees in a small area, especially if you have a small suburban lot, or maybe more tree species that you'd like to have that you really have room for. And so it's really good to do your homework and make sure that we know how big those trees are going to get at maturity, and then we put them in the landscape in an area where they can thrive. What I have right here behind you is a young longleaf pine, and this one we planted about 4.5 years ago, and we planted multiple of these throughout the yard here to eventually provide a nice shade and a good open landscape. But we gave these trees plenty of room. What we know about this species here is that it's going to max out at about 120 feet tall and maybe a 60-foot wide canopy. So it has to have space to spread out. So we did that when we looked at this. Back here in the back, we have an existing post oak. Over here, we have a bodark tree. And then back behind me over here is a loquat leaf oak. And we put this in a spot right in between all these where there's plenty of room. These other trees can continually grow. These trees aren't finished growing. They're going to continually come out this direction. But we still allowed enough space here for this tree to have its own area. Plenty of root zone space and plenty of visible sunlight for that canopy to go up. And as we space these around the yard, you can see we put another one right over here. Same thing with it. We triangulated these other trees, the loquat leaf oak, there's a pecan and a pear back over there, and then this post oak. Put the tree right in between these, but as those other trees continually grow, this tree will still have enough space to grow up. Same thing over here. If we pan off in this direction, we put this longleaf pine. It's a little close to this hackberry tree. Eventually the hackberry will go away. We know that. It's a short-lived tree. And then this tree will have plenty of room to grow. We left plenty of space between the elm, the post oak, and this post oak, so that as it grows up into maturity, it's going to have its own space. It's never going to compete with other trees and go through the stress that's associated with tree competition. So just to show you that, proper design is going to make for a landscape that's going to look beautiful more and more year after year. Okay. How did that sound, Suma?
That was perfect.
Good. Very good. Good to hear.
Yeah.
Do you have any questions on hold for me?
Yeah, there's one question. We recently had a pecan tree die, cut it down, and the stump ground up. It's on the west side of our house. What would you suggest we replace with?
Well, that's a good question and good timing in the presentation. I can't give you an answer for that, but we can give you some tips on some selection. I hate to whittle down to maybe one tree as a recommendation when we have quite a bit of species in our inventory, and it really depends on a couple things based off of your needs, your expectations as far as a tree as it matures in the landscape. But ultimately, this will be our kind of our guiding point here is looking at a diversity of tree species and be thinking about maybe planting something that's different from the majority of trees that in your neighborhood already. And the reason for that is the potential of insect pressure and disease pressure, and what we're seeing now is either freeze or drought pressure. We're throwing some climate stuff in there as well. We've had some big curveballs from Mother Nature with the winter storm Uri, last December's hard freeze, and then this cyclical 1,000-year drought that we tend to have every 10 years now. So it's looking at the previous examples, like with the elms, the Dutch elm disease moved through the Northeast, basically decimating elm populations, which was the number one street tree in the Northeast. and took out nearly all of those trees. Here, what we're seeing moving our direction is emerald ash borer um, moving into ash populations, and it's on its way down here. We're starting to see the EAB, they call it, move into our area and impacting ash and related trees. So you see like these pictures here of this Dutch elm disease with these beautiful elm trees. You see down in the lower left corner, you see the beautiful street canopy of ash trees. And then you have a tree here that's, if Paul took this is probably in Missouri City or Sugar Land. Looks very indicative of many streets here in Fort Bend County with live oak trees. And currently, um, knock on wood, we haven't had any significant issues with live oaks in our region of the state. But as we move further over to the hill country, um, oak wilt has become a huge issue. This decimated population of the oak, um, and we're doing the same thing here. We're planting a monoculture of one species in a big area. So if something does go wrong, then within a couple of years we will completely lose our tree canopy. So basically the philosophy here is try to diversify. So when you start making those selections to replace that con tree or any other type of situation, is look at the full palette of trees, and maybe one of those variables that you have on choosing the tree maybe to think about something that is not too common in your area as a replacement. But we'll get in a little bit. I'll show you some stuff online of where we can find a list of suitable trees, small, medium, and large. And that's a good list to go by to start deciding what might be the right tree for you. So this next section here is choosing not just the right species of tree, but choosing the right tree as far as something that looks right from day one. We want a healthy tree. We don't want one that comes in that's got a lot of issues prior to us purchasing that tree, bringing it home and planting. If you can start with a healthy tree that's got vigor and get it off on the right foot, it's going to do really well. But it's pretty clear that if we have a tree that is diseased, it's got insect pressure, it's showing stress from being in the container too long. Those trees take a long time to recover from that stress in the landscape. And we may spend years. We may have to throw a bunch of extra money at that tree to get it to establish and grow. We can save a lot of time to have a much larger, healthier tree much quicker by starting with one that's helpful. And so similar here, if we follow this link here on the Texas A&M Forest Service, it's going to give you a list of different things to think about when we go to purchase a tree. So an example of some of those things is a healthy canopy. We want to look up at the tree. If it's not dormant, if it has foliage on it, we want to look at the health. We want dark green leaves. We don't want any spots on the foliage that may show symptoms of foliar disease. If the tree is dormant and it's defoliated over the winter, we want to look for good, healthy stems. And a lot of times we can just take our thumbnail up towards the buds and we can scratch that dormant wood, showing a nice light green color underneath, that those buds are green and healthy. And at the bottom of the tree, we want to look for a good trunk tapering off at where the soil line is. We don't want to see a lot of exposed roots on the top, which would show that plant's been in the container for so long it's eroded a lot of the topsoil away from the root system. We want to see a good root flare that doesn't have any damage to it, because that's, the roots that develop that root flare from the beginning are the same roots that are going to develop that root flare as the tree gets older. So if it starts off with damage, that damage is there for the life of the tree. I'll explain a little bit of that here. So this is this photo of this root flare on the tree, where you can see those first group of lateral roots come from. So if that's damaged early on, if there's some rot on part of that, you might want to walk away from that tree. Picture on the left here is to show that some trees have quite a large buttressing root flare that does actually develop some anchorage and structure to the tree as it matures. Other things to look for here is just too many roots. These roots have been circling. You pick the container up and there's roots growing out of the bottom of it. That's usually a sign to walk away. That tree's been in the container way too long. And it's what we call pot bound, where the roots actually form the shape of the container. And it's hard, once it does that, it's hard for the tree to grow out of that confinement, especially if you start seeing these girdling roots that start circling around the container. We have to cut those away. But instead of trying to remedy those types of issues, it's better to find a tree that's not in that condition. Further, visual presence of insects feeding on the plant, broken branches, leaf discoloration. The picture here probably is showing some drought stress. So maybe the plant didn't get watered sufficiently, or if you keep the container in too long, you start to get mineral deposits, particularly heavy salts in the soil, that start to cause some leaf burning. So when you see this right here, this typically means that the plant is stressed out. Again, these girdling roots here, we start to see as the plant's been in the container way too long. It's trying to grow, just doesn't have anywhere to go. So these roots just start spinning around the container. And then once we plant that, as the tree grows, it girdles. It basically chokes the surrounding part of the root system and causes some rot pretty early on. And so you can have a tree like this one that may look pretty good, but due to these continually wrapping roots, at some point the structural integrity became compromised, and you can see large trees just fall after a heavy windstorm. So if it's not a situation that's real bad, but we do see quite a bit of root webbing in the container, we can just take a knife to these, or sometimes I'll pull it out and just set it on the ground and just hit the root ball with a shovel a couple times, just to kind of break these root masses up a little bit, so that they're more encouraged to start migrating out into the soil profile, instead of trying to continually form in that cylinder shape of the container. It does help them to start mining out into the surrounding soil instead of staying pot bound. Okay, let's see here. Let me go back here. I'll show you another little video here. Okay, this one here is on site preparation. I'm going to talk just briefly here about site preparation. This is something that's very important, and something that I think a lot of people don't do correctly, and you end up having issues down the road with trees not establishing well, vegetation encroaching onto the young trees that either is going to compete for nutrients and water for the young establishing plant, It's going to put it into a little bit of stress, or it may encourage you to get a little bit too close with the string trimmer as you're going around the tree in the landscape if you've got grass growing up the sides of it. So what I like to do is after I've laid out my landscape plan, I've marked the tree where I want it. I want to go in here and I want to define this spot. So I'll mark it with the marker flag, and I like to go out. I know it may sound crazy, but even for a small tree, I like to go 5 or 6 feet in a diameter around where this tree is going to be and remove all the existing vegetation. So real quick, I'm just going to go here for this one here. I got 2 feet and 3 feet. Let's go 2.5 feet with that mark. And I'm just going to kind of eyeball this as I go around, about the same amount from that flag, and a couple little spots. Okay, and once I've got my circle there, I can go in, I'm going to mark it real nice. Just like that. I'm going to go ahead and put my little dot in there just for fun. Okay, now within this spot right here, I want all the vegetation out of this area, because when I plant that tree in here, I don't want it to have to compete with anything. I want it to have its own special little spot where it's going to get established and avoid going into plant stress. If I can avoid that plant stress or transplant shock process, tree is going to respond much quicker, put on new foliage, get some roots put into the ground. So the next part of this is your personal decision. What I would use in here up to this spray painted line is I would use a broad spectrum herbicide that's labeled for grass and some broadleaf weeds that are in here. And then within a week or two, this would clear out this area of vegetation, and that would leave me a spot that's nice and ready. I could plant in that spot within 2 or 3 weeks after spraying it with herbicide. If you have reservations against herbicide, that's perfectly fine. You just need to know that you got to find an alternative way to get this vegetation out of here. And the most obvious, I think, is manual labor. You're going to need to take a hoe and a shovel and some hard garden rakes and dig all this out, sift out all the grass, and get everything good, nice and clear out of here so that we don't have any resprout. You've got some weeds in here. There's some little dollar weed. Most of this is Bahia grass, and there's a little bit of Bermuda over there, but you got to get down low and you got to get all that out of there. And once it's gone, then we're going to cover that area with a good layer of mulch to keep those weeds from coming back. By keeping this area clean here, it's keeping the tree healthy. It's keeping it from competing with existing vegetation, but it's also keeping you away from that plant. When you're mowing out here, you don't want to have to mow right up onto the tree. And when you're using your string trimmer around the edges, that you're not tempted to come up here and get close to this young tree and remove some of its fragile young bark. Roll right into the next one. It's going to be.
So before we do that, Boone,
Yes.
there are a couple of relevant questions.
Yes.
Are there any specific shade trees known for having roots that are not particularly attracted or breaking water mains?
Good question.
No.
Okay. Simple answer.
No, there are trees that are known to, and you would just think about trees that are riparian species. So these are trees that would grow close to a body of water, whether that's a wet weather creek, an actual creek, stream, a lake, pond, where it has the ability to move its root systems down to where water is. And these are going to be trees like cottonwood, sycamore, willow, Chinese tallow does this quite a bit. And they have the capabilities of moving the root system through the soil to find a water source to grow. And so those are the species that you want to stay away from because of that ability to do that. But the majority of trees that we have in our, you would say, our inventory of suitable trees don't do that. They have a pretty stationary root system that you would expect that just migrate equally around the trunk of the tree, radially in all directions, just looking for oxygen, water, and nutrients in the soil. The basic concept with most of them is the bigger tree that you have, the more extensive root system that tree is going to have. So using live oak as an example, right across the street from our office over here, we've got a farmer that he's got about 100 acres of row crops almost right up to his house. But surrounding his actual home and sheds is a large canopy, a grove of live oak trees. And I like using that as a reminder because people say that the end of the drip line of a tree is where the roots are. Well, that's really not true. It's true that's where the roots are, but that's really where the fibrous roots begin. And on a mature tree, they'll be up to 20 feet, 30 feet past that drip line. And so it's evident when you see places like our farmer over here, where if you see the row crops like a cotton or a corn or a grain sorghum that's planted right up to the base of those trees almost, you can see the impact on the crop going out about 30 feet out into the field, where it's the height of that plant or the health of that crop is diminished as you move further away from the tree up to about 30, 40 feet out from the drip line. So basically, we have what we call small, we have medium and understory trees, and then we have large shade trees. So if you have a situation where you're worried about your foundation or your water infrastructure, your water mains, sewer lines, sidewalks, etc., then you may want to stay away from these trees that are in the large tree category. Just in general, that's probably your best bet, more than defining a tree's capabilities to impact foundations. They will all impact a foundation, but some more than others. But it's more based off of the size of the tree, the mature size of the tree.
Okay. So Terry wants to know, given all these variables, is it best to plant saplings instead of like fully grown trees?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, it is. And I'm gonna talk about that right now.
Okay, there's one more question. I think I know a couple of things, but you may want to add. What tree provides most vivid fall colors? And in my experience, Shumard oak and Shantung maple do that, but are there any other trees?
Okay. We'll put those at the end.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Go through the inventory on the Forest Service website and
Okay.
Forestry Council websites.
Okay.
But let me do the difference in trees. What do you look for? Let's do this one. This will answer one of those questions. I'm going to talk just a little bit about tree selection. I've got a couple small trees right here to use as some examples. I just want to cover the bases on this, and that most people, when you look for a tree, you want to go with a 15, 20, 30-gallon tree. And those larger specimens in the containers have a hard time transplanting into the landscape. They go through a little period of stress, and if you're not managing that tree correctly, can have some issues down the line. And repeatedly, through research and studies, we found that if you plant a 5-gallon, a good, healthy, young, vigorous tree right next to a 5-year-old 15, 20-gallon specimen, plant them in the ground, treat them the same, and within 5 years, this little young tree is going to be the same size or larger than the 15-gallon or the larger specimen. The reason for that is that this tree has got more vigor, it's younger, it's healthier, and so it's going to root in, it's going to get established in the ground much faster than a tree that's been in a container, in a contained environment for a couple of years, that's been going through stress associated with not having enough root system in place. So I might try to talk you in to growing with a younger tree. The other upside to it is that you'll end up spending considerably less money with the original investment of the tree. When you go to the nurseries, it's hard to find sometimes the younger trees, but you can, if you go in early in the year and pre-order trees or talk to the nurseryman about what you want, a lot of times they'll special order some trees for you. What I have right here is a little red maple tree that I wanted to show you. And this right here is a beautiful little species. And I'll go through it. I'm looking at this little trunk. It's a good, healthy trunk, real nice and smooth. It shows a lot of good growth in between these internodes. I got good foliage at the top, a couple branches, good, healthy, young leaves. And also, if I turn this over and I ease this out of here, we've got a good fibrous root system down here towards the bottom, around the sides, and most importantly, I don't see a whole lot of circling roots in here inside the container that maybe means that it's been in this pot too long, and that may end up strangling this little tree once you put it in the ground. And so a couple other examples here. We've got a little pecan tree. If you're really on a tight budget and you want a tree in a couple years, this one here is going to set you back probably $7 or $8, and then it will eventually grow up into a nice landscape tree. So sometimes you can find those. But the flip side to that is I got a larger tree here. It's got a thicker trunk, but if I pull this out of the container, a couple things I'm noticing real quick. There's really not much soil, and this could happen to a plant that's been in the nursery too long. And if I look down here at the bottom, I see some circling roots in here, some darker colored roots that aren't healthy. And then if I look up here towards the top, I see some tip burn, some leaf burn on this that suggests that it's been in some heat stress. So this is a tree right here that I would probably avoid. And then right in the middle here of those two, we've got a little 2 or 3 gallon pecan. It's got a good, nice straight trunk, good foliage on it, and we got a good amount of soil in here. And if I pull that out, I see I got some fibrous roots on here. There's no circling in here. So this may be a tree that I'd want to go ahead and put in the landscape. Talking you into a younger tree, I've had more success with young trees than I have, and then dealing with homeowners repeatedly, people having issues with the larger trees. This would be my recommendation of something to start with. Okay. All right. So fall is the time for planting, particularly our evergreen and deciduous hardy trees. We want to plant those during the cool season. Earlier the better. Kind of the starting gate for me is about November 1st is a good time. We finally cool off. We've had some rainfall going into the fall, and we're starting to work towards winter. Right now, where we're at on the calendar, we're still seeing days up into the mid 90s, probably even to the first part of October. We'll see temperatures in the low 90s and the 80s, which may cause some stress, may try to get a tree to start putting on new growth before dormancy time. So I would set your calendar for about 1st of November as a suitable time to start planting these trees. And then on the back end of that, for me, it's going to be the first half of February. Anytime after that, start warming up already. And if I plant a tree anytime after February 15th or March 1st, doesn't have enough time to get through that transplant shock, to start to develop some fibrous roots into its new soil bed before spring comes. Spring comes on, there's a lot of growth expectation with spring weather. And we know that our spring-ish weather in Southeast Texas is about 2 weeks before we get into summer. And especially this last year, we had a really nice a brief spring with moisture and moderate temperatures, and then all of a sudden, bam, mid-June hit, and it just got hot, and real dry. So if a plant hasn't had ample time to put roots in the ground, to get settled in, to get established, that tree's going to have a really hard time moving forward as we get into summer. Chances are of it pulling through summer without, at minimum, some prolonged heat and drought stress. At maximum, probably mortality if you're not putting a lot of extra TLC into that tree. So timing is critical for us. November 1st through first part of February. We get into tropicals and citrus, stuff like that. We want to stay outside of cold pressure, freeze pressure. So we start putting those trees in the ground. Probably about March 1st would be a safe time for us to start moving into citrus and other tropicals. Historically, we see freezes after March 1st, but late season freezes are typically light, where we can get away with just covering that plant, protecting it a little bit to get it through those short freezes and get ready for spring. But all the rest of our hardy, deciduous and evergreen trees, the cool season is the way to go. All right, so we're going to go into the planting process here of digging out our hole 2 to 3 times the diameter of the root ball of the tree, and making sure that the bottom of that hole, underneath the root ball, that we pack that down. Even if we build it back up onto a small mound, that it's packed down securely so the tree doesn't sink down into the hole. What we want to see here is this root flare needs to be exposed or right at the soil surface. We don't want that tree to move down in that hole where that root flare gets hidden by soil. Ultimately, it's going to be the demise of the tree. So we can have it above the soil line. And we'll do that because of some drainage issues potentially that you may have. But we don't want that root flare to be down below the natural soil line when we plant it. When we dig that hole out, a big question that we get is, what do we put in there with the soil? Do we want compost? We want some garden mix, potting soil, and the answer is really none of that. Let's just put the native soil back in there. If your soil is real blocky, like a heavy clay, you can incorporate a small amount of soil conditioner to help loosen up those big particles of clay that you have, and that's okay. But typically, we say, you need to put the native soil back into that hole, because we don't want to create a barrier, a surface barrier where we have our heavy clay soil and then we have this potting soil mixture. Because when the roots hit that wall of clay, they're just going to spin around in circles in that hole. They're not going to want to go into it. So if we replace all the soil, the native soil, back in there, well, the only thing it has to grow into is that native soil from the get-go. So those roots are going to know that they have to move out into that profile and kind of grow out in different directions from there. But if we just have compost and a lot of soil conditioner or potting mix in there, the roots are going to kind of stay in that spot.
Excuse me, Boone. Can you turn back to slideshow?
Oh, yeah. That'd be nice.
Thank
huh?
you. Thank you.
That work?
Yeah,
Sorry
perfect.
about and so the other thing with this is, especially if you have a really heavy soil, is that we create this soup bowl. If we just if we put pine soil and compost inside that hole, and we fill that up with water, it takes a long time for that water to percolate through the clay, and so what we end up with is just this hole that fills with water, and we start to see a lot of root rot really quickly, and trees going downhill very fast, especially when we get into spring and the temperatures start rising. Trees that have had their root system compromised because of this soup bowl, they really start showing signs of stress pretty quick. And if we don't find ways to remedy that or to drain that soil out, those trees are probably going to not make it for us. Other thing is, don't be fertilizing at planting. Let's let the tree get established with the natural amount of nutrients in the soil. If we add additional fertilizers into that mix, a lot of times we can burn those young fibrous feeder roots and cause more issue. Typically, what we would say is that once the tree is established and it's showing significant spring growth, new growth, then we can start applying fertilizer to that tree, but not right at planting. Mulching is real important. This kind of shows you here the gradient. One, too little. You've got grass growing right up to that tree. The tree is having to compete with water and nutrients directly as it's trying to get established. And so it's suffering because of that grass. The other part of that is that, you or your landscape maintenance company can unintentionally hit that with a mower or damage the bark of that tree with a string trimmer. So we want to remove that vegetation away from the base of the tree. The one in the middle here is just right. We got a large area underneath the tree with it's free of vegetation, as I described in that video. Want all that grass away from the tree. This one here looks like it's about 6 foot in a newly planted tree, which gives plenty of room for that tree to start developing in that space. And it's not competing with any grass or other vegetation, and it's not having to deal with you and your mower and your string trimmer trying to do damage to the base of it. There's a little berm on the outside. I don't know if you can see there in that picture that may, if a person had to go out here on occasion to water this tree, we could flood the middle of that and let that water slowly percolate down into the subsoil there to kind of help hold the moisture where it needs to be. And the one over here on the right, we always call these the volcanoes. This is just a huge no-no. I don't know what in the world these people were thinking, but this tree will eventually die. One, because of the lack of oxygen down in the root system, but two, we're up about 1.5 feet above that root flare of the tree, which we'll start to see some bark rotting, where that trunk is covered up with mulch. And as you have the bark of that tree start to rot away, you have an open area for insects and disease to move into, and will kill that tree pretty fast. Don't do mulch volcanoes. Strapping on trees, maybe something that you need if you have a tree that's really tall, that has a large foliar canopy on it, that may be prone to catching in the wind. Temporary staking may be needed, but if you're starting with a small tree that doesn't have a huge canopy and it has a good heavy root system on it, most of the time I say don't put any strapping on there. We don't need any type of anchorage. Those smaller trees can stand up on their own, and it's good tree because that trunk develops strength as it moves around in the wind. It's just like a workout, and so that trunk will get stronger, and those buttressing roots down at the root flare will become stronger as well. But if it's tall, you have a lot of weight and a lot of foliar growth at the top that could catch the wind. You may want to temporarily hold this up with some straps, but take those off after the first growing season. Let's remove all those straps because we've seen a lot of horror stories, a lot of nasty pictures of trees that have really suffered for years because somebody didn't do their job of coming back, moving those straps, and we see trees that well, probably a lot of trees will never recover from this type of girdling. Um, so you need to put it on your calendar to go back in the second growing season, make sure that we pulled all those straps off the tree, and also the anchors. This is a T post anchor that was never removed, and now we have the tree actually growing around the T post. Okay, so watering early on, we want to keep the root system fairly saturated. Um, I probably would be thinking about the concept of watering uh, with saturation, but infrequently. So give it a week or two in between waterings. But when you water, we want to water well so that we completely saturate that root zone. But we don't want to do it so often that there's no oxygen down in the rooting hole. The tree can't breathe. Trees go through a process called respiration that's just as important as photosynthesis. So if they can't breathe, then they start to die. And so overwatering is the cause of the majority of plant death. Is just our over response to what we think is good for them. It's probably not a good thing. So watering is important, but making sure that we're not doing it so often that we're drowning the tree. Pruning is important early on. What I like to do is I get the plant established. So the first growing season is about getting it rooted in and getting it growing. Okay, and then once we're confident that we've got a plant that's taking off and it looks like it's going to be successful, then the first thing after that is to start looking at the shape of the tree. We want to make some of those pruning decisions early on. It's better to catch them before they become a structure of the plant. We're having to really chop big pieces of the tree away to maintain the shape of it. And what we see with these pictures here is we have some cross branching that are twisting. We want to eliminate those. And if we have a certain height or shape to a plant, we want to start making some of those decisions while the plant is young before it gets old. Here's a pretty good example of we've got a dual fork on a tree that really just needs to be a single trunk tree. We need to make that decision quickly from the beginning as selecting one of these two and removing the other before it becomes problematic. If we left the tree the way it is on the left, you can imagine this tree in 30 or 40 years where you have both of those Y forks growing together. And these candidates for the tree trimmers having to come out to take half of it away, and it doesn't look good. Okay, if you make this decision early on, the tree's going to grow up very healthy and have a good shape to it. If we prolong that decision, the more cost it's going to be, and then two, the more aesthetic impact. Because what's left, if you take half of this tree out later on, what's left in the ground is just not going to be very visually appealing. So make those decisions early. Similar to this right here, we've got a tree that's trying to figure out who's the boss. It's having a hard time making that. So we want to do that for it, is to take away those Y trunks, and then the rest of these basal suckers at the bottom. We have a lot of new growth at the base that's trying to come over and take dominance. We want to take those suckers and water sprouts out early, not just for the shape of the tree, but it takes a lot of energy away from the tree to produce those sprouts at the base. And so the longer we leave them, basically that's at the demise of the part of the tree that we're trying to grow. So take all this stuff out and keep it out. In spring, when you see these water shoots start to develop, cut them off as soon as you see them. Similar here, the one on the left, this conifer, we would want to try to help that tree make the decision of who is going to be the apical growing tip. We've got, looks like 3. They're trying to be the boss. So we need to clip those down to 1 to help keep that tree growing up straight and just have a good overall shape to it. What we'll end up with, if we didn't do any type of pruning, is a tree that we would see here on the right, which eventually part of this tree is going to be on the ground. And then the rest of it that's left, again, is not going to be very visually appealing for you in your landscape. So pruning early on is important. Not to go crazy with the tree, but just to help it to develop what will eventually be the mature shape of the tree. Just a little bit I'd like to cover just on pruning. A lot of people make pruning mistakes. And this is just for yourself, or if you're having somebody come and do some tree work, is making sure that they are educated and understand the concept of quality tree pruning, and that we need to make our cuts way out here, because the majority of trees have this thing that's called a branch collar and a bark ridge. And basically this is the spot on the tree here that protects the main trunk of the tree from internal rot. If we prune below this line here, past that branch collar, then we have essentially removed the tree's ability to heal that wound. And so that will be basically an internal open wound on the tree that will never heal up correctly, and probably will end up with a hole in the tree that will be prone to insect disease or animal damage in the future. If we prune it out past that branch collar, as this branch falls away, this will heal up naturally on its own. Okay, so another visual here, we have this collar, we have this bark ridge here. And so sometimes, these arborists will think that they need to cut flush straight here, but if they cut past this branch collar, then this is an internal open wound on the tree, and it's going to cause problems down the road. Now, people don't like when you tell them that they have to cut here and leave this little bit of a stub here. That'll go away in time. That's not a big issue, but a bigger issue is going and cutting past that branch collar. And so here, as far as making the cuts, you want to make a first cut way out here a little further to remove the weight of that branch. And then once that's off, then we can come here a little bit lower, and we can make our final cut right there outside of the branch collar. If you don't do this first cut and do it correctly, this branch is going to start coming down and peel down away from the tree, causing some big issues with the health of the tree, which we'll get to in a second. I'll show you a picture of it, of what that looks like down the road. This person's doing it right. First is the undercut about halfway through, and then a little further out, we do the uppercut, which is going to safely remove the branch. It's just going to fall away. because you made this lower cut. And then once we've taken the weight of that branch off, then we can come here and take this piece off. Doesn't have much weight to it, so that's going to cut away really easily for us. Okay, so here's the outcome of not doing it correctly. That branch starts to come down, and if we didn't do that bottom cut correctly, it just starts peeling away at the tree. This is what it looks like right off the bat. Not very pretty, but this is a long-term outcome. One, we cut this beneath the branch collar, and here's this scar where we had this peel out at the bottom. It's really, really not good on here. But if we do it right, it will heal up nicely. Now here's what we try to see. Some of these arborists that are untrained, they think you want a nice clean cut on there. Bad, not cool. And this one here is similarly, we're leaving too much material. That branch collar is right here, so we're leaving too much on there. That's going to be a little bit of a problem moving forward. Not good. But here's kind of what I want to show you. We call this a donut, and this is an outcome to a tree that was pruned correctly, and we start to see a vascular ring around that wound. If we cut it out past that abscission point or that branch collar, then the tree will start to develop cells and start to gradually move in and heal that. And so this is kind of what we see after a couple of years. But if we follow this down the road, there's some good examples. You know, after the cut starts to heal in, continually heals in, and then at some point, it's going to move all the way to the center and close up that wound. Okay. But similar to all this, if we made that cut here past or on the inside of that abscission point or on the inside of that branch collar, it's always going to look like this because you've removed the tree's defense to be able to heal itself. And so this will rot. The core pithwood here will rot, and then you will probably end up with a hollow section of the tree, which will eventually compromise the integrity or the structure of the tree to hold itself up. So, you know, people always ask about pruning healant of either a paint or a sometimes there's a prune seal that's a oil cover. Typically, we just say don't do it. Not for our region. It's best to just make their cut the right way. Let the tree heal up on its own. If you start to cover this with a latex coating or a creosote type coating, we have so much insect pressure and so much relative humidity, we'll end up locking moisture back behind that wound that may encourage rot more than healing the tree. And then if we start getting wood that's compromised, this pith wood, as it becomes compromised, it can attract wood boring insects to migrate down to those openings and start to work its way down into the tree. So for most situations, occasionally I'll see a tree that may be in a desperate situation where we may want to cover that up. Usually it's after like a tear out, like a big branch fell off during the wind and caused a huge open wound on the tree. There may be a special situation for that, but 99% of the time, just a good quality cut and just leave that open and it'll heal up on its own. Okay. That's all the stuff there. I didn't do all those videos, but I think I covered all the material sufficiently during the presentation. So that's the end of that. Let's open this up. I'd be more than happy to entertain any questions. I'm going to leave this slide up here. What this is two different ways that you can access a short online evaluation about today's presentation. You can type in the URL, or if you have a smartphone, you can click on the little QR there and it'll take you straight to the online survey. It's just a couple questions, takes you a minute or two. So please do that. But while you're doing that, I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
So, Boone, there are two questions on the previous topics. The first question is from Terry. Is there some point at which you do not need to mulch a tree anymore once it is mature? Or do you need to keep mulching it throughout?
Yes, that's a good question. There's lots of reasons why you mulch. I think about half of it usually is aesthetics. So considering your aesthetic expectation of your landscape, mulches provide a good texture underneath trees that's visually appealing. So there's that. But the main thing is, and I reiterated a couple times, was trying to discourage you or others from damaging the base of the tree. And so mulches help with that because there's no reason, there's no vegetation up around the base of the tree. There's no reason for you to go there with a string trimmer or the mower. So for that, that's a lot of trees I see are compromised because of mechanical damage. So using mulch as a way to minimize mechanical damage is a great thing. As the trees get older and you start to have more shade, you may have less vegetation that's trying to grow because of the amount of shade. So mulches may be something you want to continue because you don't have grass growing there. It's just bare soil. And so the more bare soil with wind and rainfall, we'll start to see erosion, and your topsoil from your landscape will gradually move down into the storm drains. So the mulch will keep the soil in place. It'll stop it from eroding so much, so you won't have a lot of these landscapes that haven't been mulched under large trees. Topsoil has eroded so much that you start to see a lot of the lateral roots exposed, and that becomes a mowing and a tripping hazard or an aesthetic hazard for the homeowner. So, beyond just the obvious reasons why you would want to do it for the health of the tree, you may want to continue it for just the aesthetics aspect of it.
Okay. So the next question is on watering the trees. Which is healthier for the tree, sprinkler system or drip? How far away from the tree would you place them?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, so for these young trees, we know where the roots are. So concentrate your watering at the base of the tree. With drip, the good thing about drip is that it's very low flow, it's low rate, so it's saturating down. With a small sprinkler, at some point the soil will become saturated and start to run off. So you'll have to just do some homework, figure out what that length is that you can use a sprinkler without that water migrating away from the tree and flooding off the surface. Tends to be about, for a heavy clay soil, that tends to be about 20 minutes. For a loamy type soil, that water should go down instead of running off for you. But as the trees get bigger, we got to start thinking about moving that water out to where the roots are. So we look at the drip line, which if you don't understand that, if you imagine yourself above the tree and you drew a ring around the outer branches, the outer span of branches, and followed that to the ground, that's what we call the drip line. That's where the water sheds off of the canopy and drops onto the ground. That really is what we call the start of the fibrous root system. and then out from there. So the larger the tree gets, the further away those roots go away from the drip line. So all that's to say that, second, third and fourth, fifth year into this tree, we have to start watering away from the tree. We don't want to be watering at the base of the tree anymore. Okay, we don't want roots there. We want roots to go way out away from the tree. And so that's where we would focus the watering at.
Okay.
I'm going to go back just real quick and I'm going to show, we had that question about the trees, the pecan tree. And so I'm going to show you a couple of just websites real quick, if that's okay, Suma.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're just going to go to the World Wide Web and I'm going to do Texas A&M Forest Service. This is a search. Okay, so this is a great tool. This is our sister agency here within the Texas A&M University system. And let's go over here where it says urban forestry. And then within the urban forestry section, there's a lot of really cool stuff. There's this tree planting guide that we like to use. We have this tree selector, and then we have this planting guide. Planting guide was a lot of the resources that were in the presentation of Paul's there, but this tree selector here will, we can go in here and I can put in Fort Bend County, and I want a medium-sized tree, and then this is going to spit out a couple of examples of some trees that are recommended that are in this medium category. So I would encourage that person that's trying to replace that pecan tree, go to this site and look around and see if you find something in there that kind of fits your need. If you click on any one of these, it gives you a lot more detail about the individual tree. Okay, I'm going to do this Houston Area Urban Forestry Council. Okay, this is a group that I'm a part of, along with Paul Wiersbicki and a bunch of other industry foresters around the greater Houston area. We've developed this council as a bunch of cool resources for people in the Houston area. So while that Texas Forest Service is kind of statewide, this one here is a lot more regional. So similar to that one, we could go to tree guides, and I can do large, small, street trees. So let's do the large trees, and we've got a full list of trees right here. Red maple, fall color, we had that in there. Green ash, Chinese pistache, fall color. Sweet gum, I love sweet gum, fall color. This is one that you typically see a lot more when you go into East Texas. But I tell you this, I'm seeing a lot of trees dying right now when I drive around, even on my property. And we've got some sweet gum on the place. Sweet gum look great. I haven't had to water them. They're out there on their own. They're making it through the summer great. And if you've been to East Texas in the fall, you'll know the fall color of sweet gums is anywhere from dark orange to maroon. They're just fantastic. Chinese pistache, another one that with great fall color. It's this bright orange to a fire engine red in the fall color. Beautiful tree. So just kind of scroll through this. This is a much more extensive list that we've done more homework here locally to identify a diversity of trees for you to plant at home.
That's great.
And that's this Houston Area Urban Forestry Council. So that'll answer both those questions on replacing the pecan and the trees that have.
Oh, your audio is lost, kind of.
What's that? You lost my audio?
Yeah, it's very low.
Oh, oops. I'll try to talk a little bit. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I was probably leaning back in my chair. Sorry about that.
Okay, that's okay.
So, what else you got?
So is it worthwhile to transplant volunteer live oak trees? If so, when can this be done?
Yeah, it's possible. So I would wait until we get definitively into the winter season. So for something like that, would probably be even later into November. Try to get that plant up and move it straight into its new location without trying to containerize it. Go ahead and get it up and get it in its new spot as quickly as possible to avoid uh, too much transplant shock. That's going to be the big issue with doing that is getting that replanted without it going through too much shock and to have it develop new roots and be ready to grow by spring.
Okay.
Take one more question.
Yeah, don't you need to seal the cut for live oak?
No.
Okay.
So that probably goes, you get a lot of misinformation because a lot of the content on live oaks coming out of the hill country out of central Texas because of oak wilt. We got to be more cognizant of our timing of our pruning. We have to protect those wounds. But in our region, we're not seeing any pressure with oak wilt, and so without that pressure of oak wilt, it really kind of opens up the calendar and kind of changes some of our practices on pruning here.
Okay. I think that's about the questions we have. And unless somebody has a question, you can unmute yourself and ask for the next 3 minutes. Otherwise, I do not see anything else.
Well, the good news here is I hear a pretty good thunderstorm outside my window right now in Rosenberg. So I hope that other folks get to experience a little bit more rain before this system moves away. I'm sure
It's
I'm glad.
raining quite a bit here in Sugarland.
That's great. Well, I'm glad to hear it. We've been so desperate for rain for so long that it's very relieving, just psychologically, that we're moving into fall the right way.
So any more questions? I do not see any more questions. Okay, there's rain everywhere. That's good.
I see one question that says best micronutrient fertilizer.
Yeah, I can't get sucked into that one. So, we would want to do a soil analysis, a soil sample. And if we want to dive down into micronutrients, we need to test for that in a soil sample. There are several labs across the state, Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. We do have a soil and water testing lab up in College Station. The web URL for that is soiltesting.tamu.edu. That's soil testing, one word, .tamu.edu. And there's the forms there for doing a soil test. And you can add on layers of testing. And one of those is micronutrients. And so you really need to do that to answer the question, am I deficient on micronutrients? And which micronutrients are we talking about? And then you can start the analysis from that will be able to tell you which minerals you need to find and apply at different rates to try to balance the needs of the soil. I just don't think that there's a product that's out there that's going to be a catch-all that's going to provide what your soil needs. Every soil is different, so the question's kind of backwards. You really need to figure out what the soil needs, and then from there, if you get an analysis and you don't know where to find those types of products, you can call to our office, talk to myself or one of our master gardener help desk volunteers, and we would help you kind of hold your hand through that process. But there's not a product out there that fits all.
Okay. So we have two more questions. This is actually a grass question. With drought and restricted watering, their Bermuda grass is sparse with a twig here and there. Are the roots still intact underneath, and will it come back with rain, or do they have to replace it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. So if people didn't mow, a lot of people were trying to kind of mow the grass short through the summer, but both St. Augustine and Bermuda grass will go into a drought induced dormancy. And so if there's a good amount of canopy left on the grass, the grass is intact, even though if it's gone brown and it looks terrible, after rainfall and cooler temperatures, the chances are it's going to come back. But if people are trying to micromanage the grass during the summer and cutting it down real short, it could be splotchy when it comes back. But if it, a lot of times the summer dormancy, it looks very similar to a winter dormancy. So like the Bermuda grass in the middle of January is just brown, but it's got a lot of brown dormant foliage on it. It'll look like that in the summer during a drought. And then as soon as we get some cooler temperatures and ample rainfall, it should green back up for you.
Yeah. And the last question that I see is pecan tree is shedding branches. Why?
What's that?
Pecan tree is shedding branches. They want to know why.
Because of drought.
Yeah.
Just as simple as that.
Yeah.
Trees need a certain amount of moisture to a moisture percentage within the branches and within the pith wood of the tree for them to stay intact. And so when you start going beneath that percentage of moisture within the wood of the tree, it becomes fragile. And so there's a lot of weight on those branches. And if that pith wood of the tree becomes fragile because of the lack of moisture, they just start cracking. And you'll find big pieces of pecan trees are known for that, laying out underneath the trees pretty regularly. But the good thing about pecans is that they're pretty resilient. So you may have a lot of canopy fallout here in the next couple of years because of this drought. But more than likely, if they're allowed to recover, they'll flush out new growth and kind of reshape themselves on their own.